Thank you, Sean. Good morning, everyone. Appreciate everybody's participation today for our qualifying educational session here with Dr. Tom McDougall. He's going to give us an overview and a really interesting talk today about his recent book, Karma Doesn't Need My Help. Um, Tom is the CEO and founder of Badlands LLC, a healthcare consulting firm. He earned his Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from Samford University, an MBA and MHA from UAB, and a Doctorate of Science in Healthcare Leadership and Administration from the University of Alabama at Birmingham, UAB. So, Tom, without further ado, really appreciate it and turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this book. I want to begin by sharing one thing important. There's going to be a follow-up session. I think it's at 1 o'clock. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Sean, but at 1 o'clock, it's going to be a panel discussion about this where I'm going to involve two leaders that I have an enormous amount of respect for that have been integral to really discussing this book. So they're going to talk to you kind of about their perspectives, but I hope you can rejoin for that as well. But why I wrote this book. I took my first hospital CEO job when I was 27 years old, and I didn't know what I was doing. I've had multiple times people have said, wow, that's impressive. The impressive part is I didn't get fired because I probably deserved to be fired on numerous occasions just because of my ignorance and my lack of experience. And I wrote the book because there are a lot of leadership lessons I kind of had to figure out the hard way by trial and error. And hopefully, this book will help with others not having to go through the experience I went through. The original thoughts of this book were probably at this point about 12 years ago. I wanted to write an authentic book about what it was like to be a healthcare leader and some of those lessons. But more importantly, I wanted to tell some stories that I needed to retire before I told those stories. I didn't know when I was going to retire, but at age 55 in 2024, I made a decision to retire. And that's when I stopped operating hospitals after 23 years as a hospital CEO. And then I realized the pressure was on. I had promised myself I'd write the book, but I had also promised myself I would write it after I retired. So I was honored that Quint Studer, Dan Collard, they agreed to help me publish this book. The book is essentially designed around 11 weeks and built off of 11 lessons. And hopefully, I can help you not with just finding success, but finding some peace in your leadership, both personally and professionally. That was my biggest challenge is I lost my peace. And as you hear some of my stories, you'll probably figure out why that is. So, what we're going to talk about is the foundations of the book. And you've got inside of you the ability to have both success and peace and to have an enjoyment in all the things that you do. During my time as a hospital CEO, that first really 15 years or so, I had an enormous amount of peace about it. I felt very good about things that were going on. And then in those last years, I started losing some of that. I started losing some of that peace that I had felt previously. So I want to help a little bit with why, I'm sorry, I've lost my camera, why that changed for me. So let's talk about a little bit about why healthcare is so hard. I think that's a really important thing for you to consider because we need a basis for why stress exists in healthcare leadership. It's just an unfortunate piece of the puzzle. So let's talk about that. And I can go back to really the past 10 to 15 years. We've seen some real rapid evolution in healthcare leadership. And I want to explain this. The first piece of this is four evolutions. The first one is what I refer to as pre-COVID, which was 1990. Well, I'm sorry, I should say 2010 to 2020. During this time, we had this period of very significant activity that was occurring in the healthcare organizations. It was a very intense time. There was a lot of pressure to do the right things, to be successful, to lead with boldness, to lead with authority, to lead with a drive that was not only encouraged, but admired by others. And that was a really important part of this puzzle. And so you had this boldness that you really needed to accomplish pre-COVID. Well, we all know that COVID changed things. When COVID hit, it was an awkward time. For those of you that had C-suite positions at the time, you know it was a really tough time. And I was at a hospital down the coast of Mississippi at the time that COVID hit. We had the second and fourth confirmed COVID cases in the state. So all of a sudden, I find everyone looking at me because they want answers. And it was the administration area was right next to our medical staff dining area. So I would go in the medical staff dining area and had this awkwardness where I had leaders and I had physicians looking at me saying, Tom, what do we do? How do we handle this? And it was a tough time. And I found it to be not only exhausting, but also overwhelming because suddenly I went into a role where I was expected to have all the answers and no one had the answers. So it was a very difficult time to be a healthcare leader. The next period of time was the staffing crisis that followed that. And during this time, we were expected to almost completely change how we functioned as leaders of healthcare organizations to where we had to not be the go-to, know everything, have all the answers person, to where we almost had to be grandfatherly. We had to be the CEO of an organization where people wanted to work because you were likable, you were even lovable and because we didn't want anybody to leave. So we had this challenge. I remember I was sitting in a situation where I had more than 20% of our nurses were travel nurses. And the challenge that that was creating from a cultural perspective were really a lot. So you've moved from being this almost Wizard of Oz type leader to now you're almost the grandfather of the organization, just trying to hold everybody together. And then we went into our current period, which I refer to as financial strain. So we had inflation hit, which was brutal. My organization had a 38% increase in average hourly wage over about 18 months, which was really tough to overcome. On top of it, we lost a lot of our COVID funding. So the now I have to go back to being an accountability leader. But I had just come through a period of time when I wasn't holding people accountable because I just needed them to stay. I needed them to stay focused. I needed them to really focus on what was happening in the organization. So we add on top of that, we got other challenges. AI is taking over. Just ask your friendly physician to explain to you how many times patients come in and tell them what they've read online or what Gemini or ChatGPT has said about their physical or mental condition. We also have an aging workforce. We have some very hardworking folks that are reaching retirement age, and that's being replaced by a younger generation that thinks and acts differently. They also have different needs. So we've got that going on top of it. From purely an operational perspective, we also had this confluence of three things that happened all at once, really, which was private equity was stepping into a lot of the physician practices, which was creating a new challenge for healthcare organizations. We also had the No Surprise Billing Act, which, in my opinion, is highly understated in terms of the importance of impact, particularly on hospitals, because all of a sudden, ER physicians, anesthesiologists, radiologists, some of these specialties that were relying on very high compensation from being out of network suddenly didn't have that compensation anymore. And then add to it the inflation. So we had that piece of the puzzle happening as well. And then what I'm seeing is some challenges related to healthcare leadership succession. In the last 10 years, the two most talented chief operating officers that I had under my leadership, they were extremely talented. Neither one of these individuals wanted to be a hospital CEO. They were perfectly content as a chief operating officer. And at first, I took that personally because I thought, wow, I must make this job look terrible. But they were just very self-aware that they didn't want to have to deal with all the things that hit my desk or every problem that walked into my office. They wanted to have a more limited role. So I get concerned about how that's going to impact healthcare going forward. So all of those things come together with what the book is built around, okay? And this is the core fundamental piece is you control you and you only control you. And that's where we're going to go with this. And you see this book on the right, okay? It's called Toilets, Bricks, Fish Hooks, and Pride. Strangest title I've ever seen. Maybe the only second strangest title is Karma Doesn't Need My Help, which I accept. This book is a sports psychology book, and it was about 15 or 20 years ago because of all things, I love college softball. I love the challenge that they have on their hands with the actual game. I also love the psychology of the game. And they were talking about how teams were embracing this concept. And the ultimate concept that they were embracing is known as E plus R equals O, which is simply event plus response equals outcome. The concept is this, and this is going to challenge some of you. And I honestly, it took me probably 5 to 10 years before I was willing to fully embrace it. But the concept is this, is that events happen all around you all the time. And you have to accept you have no control over those events. A lot of us think as healthcare leaders that we are controlling, we are influencing, we are defining outcomes of events, or we're controlling what events may happen around us. But I'm here to tell you, no one controls the events around them. Not even the President of the United States, not Bill Gates, not Tim Cook. No one is truly controlling everything that's happening around them from an environmental perspective, an economics perspective, or a competition perspective. So you just have to accept that I can't control those events. So the only way to have influence, or for lack of a better word, control the outcome is your response to the events. Now, this is where the challenge comes in because you have 100% control over your response, whereas you have no control over the event. You have 100% control over the response, and therefore you have control over the outcome. Now, that's a lot to carry. And when I first heard this concept, I thought, okay, that's limited to sports. But I've come to learn, and I have tested this on numerous occasions, to where I'm convinced that life and leadership follow this formula, that we don't have control over the events happening around us. We do have control over our response, and therefore we can influence the outcome. Now, that's a lot of pressure because before I could say, well, Dr. So and so did this. I had no control over that, so I had no control over the outcome. In fact, I did. I had some control over that outcome depending on how I responded. And that is the key to this concept of E plus R equals O. Mario Andretti famously said control's an illusion. He was the race car driver, and when asked about how he did all the amazing things on the track, he said, well, control's an illusion. I'm not in control of anything. I'm responding to everything happening around us. And famously, Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face, which, quite frankly, I think is a pretty fair statement of what healthcare leadership is like, is that we do have a plan. I mean, you probably are like me that I didn't get out of bed without a plan, but that plan can change in an instant depending on events that are happening around us. And so the key is not to stress over the events that are happening around us, but to be very focused on when those events occur. Your first step is what is my desired outcome from this event? Whether it's a good event or a bad event, what do I want to happen as the outcome from this event? And therefore, I've got to focus on my response and do so intently. So let's move to the concept of why this book is called Karma Doesn't Need My Help. And some of you probably recognize this person. This is Charlie Munger, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. He was Warren Buffett's right-hand man, but in the 1970s, he talked to a group of Harvard business students. And the main core of his talk was that karma didn't need his help. This man, who was extremely successful and by a lot of people's standards, realized that others were going to disappoint him. And one of his favorite phrases was, "We often judge ourselves by our intentions, but judge others by actions." The reality is you just can't control those things. The question, though, becomes, do you believe in karma? Do you believe that karma is real and the concept of that the universe will right the wrongs? The universe will reward those that are kind and compassionate to others. The universe will punish those that are unkind or uncompassionate to others. So you're probably sitting there thinking, I don't know whether or not karma is real, or you've already reached your conclusion. The danger zone, though, is if you do believe in karma, because that can really affect your mindset in terms of life and leadership. And we're going to dig into that a little bit. But what I want to start with, though, is that karma is expensive. If you are wishing karma or even trying to obtain karma for how someone has disappointed you, it is a big expense to you personally because it's going to affect not only your emotional state, but may very well take you down some paths that are uncomfortable or those that you may not be very proud of. So, my encouragement to you is just to get over it. But let's go back to just a little bit about whether or not karma is real. Okay. I'm not going to debate the scientific piece because I don't think there's any logic in that. I don't think this is a scientifically proven thing that the universe does, in fact, there's some mathematical formula for karma. That's not true. But I do believe it's a very strong belief system in our society. And the New York Post, in fact, reported in 2024 that 84% of Americans believed in karma. The American Psychological Association did a further study that really was interesting because they talked about, so the respondents said they talked about karma from their own personal experience. They thought that it was more positive. Okay. But if they talked about karma happening to someone else, it was highly negative. Okay. So just without dragging you down that rabbit hole too far, I refer to it as the juju effect. Good karma for me, bad karma for you. So I believe that if I do the right things, if I treat people correctly, that will come back to me in a positive manner. But if somebody mistreats me, which is my default, then the universe will get even with them. Okay. The key here is you got to let it go. Okay. Have I been wronged? Yes. I have been fired from jobs. I have been mistreated. I have had physicians that drug me through the mud, even though I didn't do what they said that I did. In fact, they did it. But rather than them feel like that the other physicians didn't like them for their behavior, they twist it and turned it into something that I did. Very uncomfortable situation to be in. So, you're probably thinking about times that, you've been mistreated by someone else because of selfish reasons or whatever that might be. But again, I want us to get to a point where we can just get over it. That's the key point. So you're thinking, okay, E plus R equals O. Karma doesn't need my help. I need to let it go. But how do you do that? All right. And that's where the book comes in. So the book, the last two chapters of the book are karma and E plus R equals O. But the first nine chapters talk about strategies that I have learned over the years that help us be ready to embrace both of those things. And we're going to talk about some of those strategies today. And you're going to do the math. I'm not talking about every strategy in the book. I'm going to hit the high points. All right, the first one is strategy one, and I refer to it as the light switch approach. And this is a challenge for all of us. We have that conversation that raises an emotional response in us. So it might be something really good that we're really excited about, or it could be something's terrible. Somebody walks in your office and gives you horrible news about something, and that makes things uncomfortable. And the light switch approach is simply this, that you've got to be able to move from one conversation to the next, not carrying the emotions of the previous conversation. Negative emotions are harmful to you, and you got to be careful with those. The emotions can be your friend, they can be your enemy. It may be motivating to you, and it may be detrimental to you. And you need to know which one it is for you. So, me personally, when I felt stress, which is a negative emotion that I've chosen to feel, when I feel stressed, it motivated me. It energized me because I recognized that emotion and I wanted to deal with it. Unfortunately, not all negative emotions had that effect on me because fear is one that almost is debilitating to me. If I have fear, I can't think straight. So you need to know how you are responding to those emotions. You also need to accept that your emotions are greatly influencing the people around you and your organization. Positive emotions tend to be very contagious, and people pick up on your positivity and your excitement, and they join you with that in the organization. But your negative emotions can almost be pandemic. So I realized quickly that if I was real upbeat or I was real downbeat, I could feel it in my organization. So I had to start using this light switch approach of where mentally I would flip a switch and just say, okay, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling fear, I'm feeling nervousness. I got to stop that before I go into my next conversation. So I would mentally flip a light switch in my mind to move on to the next conversation without the emotional baggage of the previous conversation. And when you think about that light switch, it can help you. It can really help to get those emotions separated into the appropriate category. We talked earlier about knowing your desired outcome and then formulating your response. This light switch approach helps you do that because it clears your mind of the negative or positive emotions and helps you to move to that next conversation without that baggage. You also need to be sensitive to the verbal and nonverbal that you're experiencing with this. Okay, so you may think I'm not saying anything that's communicating a negative emotion, but in fact, your nonverbal is communicating it. For me personally, I knew it was all in my face and it was all in my communication. If I was normally talkative, but I became quiet, people sensed that I was dealing with negative emotions. And so flipping that switch between every encounter is the first strategy. Second strategy is the power of perceived ignorance, is the way I refer to it. And it's the hierarchy of leadership. How many times have you been in a meeting and the person that has the largest role, whether that's by title or by influence, states their opinion in the meeting? And when they do that, I refer to them as the E.F. Hutton of leadership, where they are speaking their mind and now people are going to listen to them. I have personally shut down meetings that my intention was to get the input of other people, but I said my opinion too early and I did the meeting in because everybody else got quiet, whether they didn't want to disagree with me or they were concerned that I wasn't going to like what they had to say because I'd already made up my mind. So you got to be careful with those pieces. And then you also have what's referred to as the dumbest phrase ever. The dumbest phrase ever is very simple. It is, I already knew that. Wow, I have shut down some organizations by convincing everybody that I knew everything. So, natural human reaction is, why am I going to invest time telling Tom something if he already knows everything? So, I was the last person in the building to find things out because nobody would come tell me anything. Later in my career, I completely flipped my strategy on this to where I would not believe something until I'd heard it 3 times. And I could have that third person telling me something, and they had no idea I'd already heard it twice because I wanted to hear it again. And I wanted to hear it from a different perspective. And so it's a really important piece to avoid ever telling anyone, I already knew that. It doesn't accomplish anything other than affect your communication flow. So that's the second important strategy. The third one I talk about in the book is what I refer to as go-to leadership danger. We talked a little bit earlier about the COVID time period, and I'm not talking about that time period right now because I think that's what everybody wanted. They wanted someone who was big, bold, and in charge and had all the answers. And so we were expected to be that go-to leader. Now, if you join us for the session this afternoon, you're going to hear a little bit different perspective on this potentially from one of the people that's going to join me, Paul, because Paul Theriault and I differ on the view of this. And I hope he'll dig in and talk to you about that because my concept is simply this, is that I don't have to make every decision when I'm leading an organization. Early in my career, I thought I did. I thought that was my job. I thought that was my role. I thought that I had to be in control. And I learned quickly, going back earlier, control is an illusion. So I'm not going to be in control. So why do I have to make every decision? Great story. I had a guy in my organization that he was one of my directors, and he always made me laugh because he would come into my office usually in the afternoons, and he was always stressed. And he was one of these people. He just put his hand on his forehead as he walked in the room, and you thought, okay, here we go. And he walked in. Unfortunately, the moment he walked in, I was not late, but I was running out of time to get a report to my boss. And so I told him, I said, look, you're going to have to come back and see me in about 45 minutes. I've got to finish this. I'm happy to talk to you after that. And I'll be happy to help you with whatever it is that you need, but I can't do it right now. Well, fast forward to the next day, and I realized this director never came back to see me. He never came back yet the previous afternoon, and I hadn't seen him that morning. So I wasn't too far from his department. So I went by his office and popped my head in his office and said, hey, I apologize, couldn't help you yesterday. What was going on? What do you need my help with? And very quickly, he sits back in his chair and he says, oh, I already solved it. And I thought, okay, well, that's fine. So I move on. But then it hit me. I had never heard him say he had already solved something. And so in over the next 24 hours or so, I was processing through because I'm big on reflection. So I was processing through, did I do something that was harmful in my communication with him? And I realized something is that he was fully capable of solving whatever problem he was bringing to me, but I had positioned myself as the go-to person in the organization that I could solve anything. I could make any decision. And I had trained him to let me do his job. So I was doing a lot of solving everybody else's problems when they were fully capable of doing it. But why do that if the CEO of the hospital is happy to do it for me? So I had created an environment that wasn't very healthy. And it led me to this lesson of I don't have to make every decision. It's okay that if I let other people make decisions. And as I said earlier, you may hear from Paul this afternoon where he's going to tell you he doesn't feel that way. He and I disagree on this. And I love his perspective because he has a completely different perspective than I do. But both are passionate about why we believe what we believe. The second piece I've learned is that decision making doesn't have to be a race. You don't have to do it immediately. You don't have to fix every problem as soon as it pops up. There are a lot of problems that will come up in healthcare organizations, and if we just let them sit for a short period of time, they have a weird way of solving themselves. And a lot of times it gets solved better than if you immediately solve it. Because, back to our point earlier, that sometimes these issues come with emotional baggage. And if the emotions are high, people don't think straight, at least on average. Most people don't. So if you let the emotions subside a little bit, or you let the urgency, kind of sink in, maybe this isn't an urgent problem. we can let this kind of solve itself. Things do solve themselves. Your team, your frontline staff can solve a lot of problems if you just give them a little time to do that. And I encourage you to create those opportunities because it's empowering. If you position your organization to where you're not the go-to decision maker on every single thing, and you're not rushing to solve every problem, you are empowering your organization to develop their own ability to solve problems without your input. And again, Paul and I disagree on this, but I found this to be a very successful strategy. And we can adopt from SEAL team mantra: slow is smooth, smooth is fast. If you're dealing with a problem that is patient safety or staff safety or could have very negative ramifications on your organization, yes, you need to solve it quickly. But if it is not necessary that you have an extremely fast response, it's okay to let it sit because then that smoothness in your approach is a fast way to get to the resolution that's going to stick. So I would encourage you to think through it from that perspective. All right, strategy four. This is where I'm going to challenge a lot of you because if I have anything in this book that I have people push back on me about, it is my concept of two things. One is that things are going to go wrong, and two is that you have to be prepared to protect yourself. Okay. And I mentioned earlier, I've been fired. Okay. I've had it happen to me. We're just out of the blue. I don't have a job anymore. And that can be a really tough situation. I've also been in situations to where I was being asked to do something that I didn't feel good about. Either it was conflicting with my belief in the proper strategy for my organization, or I'm not going to go into details, but I have had situations where I was being encouraged for my organization to provide a service that I personally had an ethical issue with. Now, would I have allowed that service to proceed if I had been forced to do so? I would have because I didn't own the organization, but I also would have gone to find another job, maybe quickly, because it was just an ethical issue that really bothered me. So you may find yourself in this really tough situation. Things can go wrong, and they will go wrong if you're in healthcare leadership long enough. So we're going to talk about the first concept of go to hell money. Now, there is a retired professor at UAB. Some of you are probably smiling at this point because you know the name Howard Hauser, and you have heard Dr. Hauser talk about go to hell money. I was 20, let's see, I was 22 years old, sitting in his class, first semester UAB, working on my master's in healthcare administration. And Dr. Hauser he's a mess. And he started talking about, hey, by the way, I know you've enrolled and you're paying to get your master's in healthcare administration, but there's a pretty good chance you're going to get fired one day. And I was like, oh, what are we doing? Are we really having this conversation while I'm still in school? Um, but he also brought in the point I made just a moment ago about the ethical issues. There may be a time you get asked to do something you're not comfortable doing for whatever reason. And he talked about that you needed to have go to hell money. And what that meant is whether it was forced on you or you chose to do it and you left an organization unexpectedly and abruptly, that you needed to have a safety net there. You needed to have, and he recommended, and I think he was right, 6 months of money set aside to cover your living expenses. So this is just in case. If something goes bad, you've got the money sitting there so that you and your family or whoever depends on you is okay until you find that next opportunity. And that money is freeing. I'm here to tell you, I embrace this. Okay. Did I start with having 6 months? No, I did not. But once my wife and I got married shortly after graduate school, as quickly as I could, I got to 2 months. And I put that money somewhere safe just in case because I wanted it there. And then I built up to where I had 6 months available. It took me a number of years, but I had 6 months available. And, it was so freeing that some of my personal stress I felt before I had that money set aside just kind of went away because I knew it was going to be okay. It was going to be all right. We weren't going to lose our house. We weren't going to have to move out of our apartment, whatever the situation was. We could still make our car payments. It was okay if something happened that I didn't have control over. Okay, but let's talk about how we get to that go to hell money because getting that money set aside is a challenge. And that's what I refer to as the 65% target. This is where I get pushback because my opinion is one of the most freeing things as a leader and personally is living on 65% of your take home income. And I've got a buddy that I've known for, wow, I've probably known 15, 20 years. He read my book and he called me when he got to this chapter of the book. And he said, I'm mad at you. And I said, why are you mad at me? He said, because I read that chapter twice. And he said, now my anxiety level is out the roof. And I said, okay, what did I say in the book that bothered you that much? He said, your book didn't bother me. He said, it bothered me because of the situation I'm in. And I said, well, man, what's your situation? And he said, I think I told you about 3 or 4 months ago, I wasn't really happy in my job. And I said, yes, I remember that. He said, well, the truth is, I hate my job. And I said, okay, well, I'm sorry to hear that. And he said, oh, and to make matters worse, I figured out about 2 weeks ago, I'm pretty sure my boss hates me. And I said, oh, buddy, man, that's tough. And he said, yes, and that's why I'm mad at you. And I said, okay, I'm not following that piece. He said, because yes, I have embraced a target, but I've embraced the 95% target. He said, Tom, if I get fired, I don't have go to hell money because I haven't been setting aside money to do that. And he said, I'm trapped and it just broke my heart for him. So it really it's so freeing to not have the worry about what if something bad happens. Ferris introduced me. I don't run hospitals anymore. I made a decision. I don't want to do that anymore. I spend time doing two things. One is healthcare consulting, and this book's a piece of that. The other thing I do is I'm a land real estate agent. I always had a dream of doing that, so I do that. But I can tell you when I stopped running hospitals and jumped off to start doing these two things, I told my wife, we've been married 33 years. I told her, I said, number one priority, and she finished my sentence for me. She said, to get clients and to get everything where we need to financially. And I said, oh, no. I said, number one priority is we need 8 months of savings set aside just in case something goes wrong. And I did it. I spent the first 18 months, I did everything I could to put aside as much money as I could. So now, I'm not worried about the real estate commission coming in this month. I'm not worried about my consulting work. I'm not worried about how many books I sell because I'm super focused on just doing the right thing each and every day. And I know I've got the money set aside to take care of us regardless of what money comes in any given month. It's so freeing. I'd encourage you to read the book and really think through that piece. All right, so I spent a lot of time on that, but it's really important to me. Strategy five is brief. You've got stakeholder groups, and I refer to this as the rule of two. A buddy of mine taught me about this concept. He didn't call it the rule of two, I named it, but he taught me the concept. You have stakeholder groups. So it may be a group of directors, it could be your C-suite, it could be everybody that works in the Department of Radiology, it could be your board members, it could be your medical staff leadership, it could be any group. So just think of any group in your organization that you work with. So let's start with that. Think through your groups. The concept here is you're going to have issues at some point with that group, either collectively or individually. And you need to recognize that very carefully, okay? Because if you fail to quickly address any issues that come up within these stakeholder groups, you're going to be at risk. All right, so now let's talk about why I call it the rule of two. So let's use an example. You have a board of governors or board of trustees or whatever you want to call them. And let's say that there are 8 people on that board. It's okay if one of them is aggravated with you about something. It's okay. It happens. Do I want it to happen? No. You may have had to give them an answer they didn't like, or they didn't like the way you handled something. So be it. But what if one person's aggravated with you, and then a second person becomes aggravated with you? Now you have the rule of two in effect. And have I handled situations where I had out of 8 people, 2 different people that were aggravated with me about something at the same time? Sure, I have. I have. But what if that turns into 3, or even worse, 4? Well, now I've got this building problem in this stakeholder group because I don't need to have issues with the entire group. I'm okay with an issue with an individual, even though I don't want it. But the rule of two concept is this. If you have anybody in that stakeholder group that gets aggravated with you, your focus and your mission should be to get that to go away. Because if I don't get it to go away, and then that builds to a second person being aggravated, now I've got a problem. And anybody who's ever worked for or with a board knows that if I reach a point where 3 out of 8 board members are aggravated with me about something, I'm probably or possibly going to need my go to hell money. So you want to be really conscious of the rule of two. You read the chapter in the book, the concept is simple. Just get it resolved somehow, some way. Don't compromise your integrity, don't compromise your organization, but get those issues resolved to where they don't build up and become a massive problem. Strategy 6. This one is one I have lived through. You probably have too. Um, you just cannot, under any circumstances, outwork or out hustle bad economics or bad luck. You just can't. Bad economics happened. 2007, 2008, I was fighting bad economics. We all were, but I also had bad local economics, and my hospital was struggling. So I was super focused on accepting that I can't do anything about it. You also can't deal with bad luck. I had a situation where one of my busiest surgeons in the organization that was just honestly, he was a money-making machine for the organization. All of a sudden, he passed away. Just bad luck, horrible luck. Sad for his family. Sad for me because I really liked that guy, but it was just so unfortunate. You cannot out hustle those things. You cannot outwork them, so you have to accept them. There's a phrase, you make your own luck. And I can't find anybody of importance that's actually said this, even though I've heard hundreds of people say it. But let's give credit to Harvey Specter from the show Suits, because he said it over and over again. I'm going to tell you, that's really bad advice. You don't make your own luck. What you can do, though, is you can minimize, you can mitigate, you can bluff, and you can prepare for better days. I mentioned 2007, 2008. The economy was horrible. My hospital was struggling. I couldn't do anything about 2007, and we missed budget, and we missed budget bad. But all of 2007, we were preparing for better days. And in 2008, still with all the same economic challenges we were dealing with, we achieved 120% of budget. So mitigating is how we got there. So really important with strategy 6. Strategy 7, we're going to talk about, and I'm going to be real with you. I was not an alcoholic, but I drank way too much alcohol. I did. And January of this coming year will be 10 years since I had a drink. Now, when I stopped drinking, I decided that's probably something I needed to do. My father passed away in his early 60s, and I decided if I was going to take care of myself and be available for my family, I needed to make some changes just to try to outlive him. But I also accepted that I was doing something that is unhealthy, is the alcohol was numbing the stress from my work days. Now, before you get real judgmental of my decision to use alcohol for numbing the stress, think about what you do to numb stress because I know people who social media is how they choose to numb, and they spend hours every night on social media for whatever reason. That's just how they do it. Or I've known people who exercise to the point of it being unhealthy, or they won't eat properly and it harms them. So everybody's got different ways. I mean, think about, I mean, if you numb your stress by eating half gallon of ice cream every night, it's a poor decision. Now, stress is inevitable and you've got to embrace it. As the Marines say, you've got to embrace the suck. You've got to embrace the stress. And you've got to lean into that stress, accept it's there, but you need to come up with good habits and avoid addictions. I replaced drinking with running. Now that's become almost an addiction. I hate missing a run because I know it mentally and emotionally resets me. But think through how you deal with stress and whether or not it's a healthy method to do this. This is an important strategy seven. In strategy eight, we're going to kind of bring some of these things together. Is that I learned boldness is encouraged, it's not always rewarded. I could not tell you how many times I have I've come up with a plan. My boss knows about the plan. My boss is supportive of the plan until we have unintended consequences. And it happens. Okay, so you've got great intentions of how you're going to solve something, and it blows up on you. I've had this happen numerous times, and I have had twice, two different bosses that absolutely abandoned me when the unintended consequences came up. They just did. They were encouraging my boldness until they weren't. And one of them resulted in me getting terminated. The other one resulted in my boss getting terminated, which I hate that for him. But when he abandoned me, his boss realized he had abandoned me. And so unfortunately, this should just become part of healthcare, is that it's just accepting that this boldness is encouraged. Just sometimes it's not rewarded. And that's why you've got to make sure that you do several things. One is always be loyal, no matter what, even when somebody's not loyal to you. Because again, you control you. Focus on your response. The event is their disloyalty, but you need to be loyal. Don't ever waver. I never criticize my boss. Well, that's not true. I would criticize my boss to my wife, the one person on earth I trust to never repeat something I say. But I would never, ever criticize my boss in front of my subordinates, or anyone else in my organization. Even if I thought he was wrong or she was wrong, I wouldn't do it because I'm always going to be loyal, even if that's not deserved. But you've got to protect yourself. You've got to have the go to hell money. You've got to achieve that 65% target or something close to it. I would also encourage you to listen to the what I refer to, and my wife laughs at me about the interesting phone call, because it seems like every time I ever took a new job, it was because I would go home at night and we'd be having dinner and I'd say, "Hey, I got an interesting phone call today." And it was a new job opportunity. I did not listen to the interesting phone calls as often as I wish I had. I wish I had always kind of in the back of my mind had that plan B. So I would encourage you to do that. Third thing, document. If you have a strategy, you've got something you're going to do, your boss is out there in support, and you verbally had a conversation, there's no harm in sending an email to them after the conversation, just saying, "Hey, I just want to recap. We talked about this. I'm going to do this. Let me know if you change your mind about this." Sadly, I have had to pull out that document before. So I would encourage, it's not being disloyal to your boss, it's making sure, number one, you've confirmed you're on the same page. Really important piece that I've learned. All right, so let's summarize. Got about 10 minutes, so let's summarize. I want you to become the leader that others want to follow, not because of your title, not because of your role, but they want to follow you. This superpower of kind of controlling your emotions, controlling your success, controlling your peace, you have that in you. You just got to implement a few strategies to get there. Lead with that emotional excellence, not intelligence. Emotional intelligence is overrated. Emotional excellence is where you really need to be. And that's that real intense control over your emotional responses. Do be prepared if and when things go bad so that you can handle that. Your family will do that. And most importantly, just like the book title, others are going to disappoint you. Please let it go. Um, I, yes, I have been wronged a lot of times, but you know what? I don't harp on it. I don't sit and worry about it. I let it go. And I'm so much happier from doing that. I don't wish karma on others. I figure if karma is real, which I think societally, from a society perspective, we have made it real, karma is going to take care of itself. People who mistreat others, eventually they're going to get it. Somebody's going to mistreat them. It just happens. I think it just kind of naturally happens. But I need to let it go. And I'm certainly not going to actively do something that's going to cause somebody to experience karma. All right, so you want to learn more about the book? This is the website. It's pretty simple to go through. I think it's only 130 something pages. It's broken into 11 weeks. It takes about 30 minutes a week. Read a chapter, reflect on some questions, and more importantly, I want you to decide whether you agree or disagree with me. I've told my kids their entire lives, they're 29 and 26 now. I tell them, I don't care what you believe, but I want you to be able to explain why you believe it. Have the backing basis for it. Have the ability to explain it to somebody else. Then you really believe it. So I will stop there. Are there any questions? Sean, or Ferris, are there any questions that have come up in the chat that I could answer?
Hey, well, we open it now. The floor is open if you have any questions. But while we're waiting, why don't you talk? Some people might not remember, but talk about your Mississippi connection. You were our regent for a short period of
Oh yeah.
time.
Well, that's actually a great story, and Sean knows this. Um, I got a phone call. I was running what was called at the time Merit Health in Biloxi, and ACHE. I've been a fellow for I don't know 27 years now. Seems like ACHE out of Chicago called me and asked me to throw my name in the hat for Regent, and I said, okay, I'll be happy to do that. That's fine. And so they led me to believe there was going to be like four people that were going to be voted on for Regent, and when the ballot came out, I called back to ACHE in Chicago and said, hey, I'm a little confused. I got the ballot for voting. And honestly, I was probably going to vote for somebody else. And I'm the only person on the ballot. Is there something wrong? And they go, oh no, you're the only candidate. So that's how I became regent of Mississippi.
It's good on your resume. There you go.
I
So
know. I enjoyed it though. It was
yeah.
fun.
Well, we have Keena on here also. Dr. White is a past regent, so she took
Awesome.
away of her from Mississippi. She's in Texas now. And Robin Mixon is our current regent, so she's on the call. So we have all kinds of ACHE regents on here. So if you have a question for Dr. McDougall and you cannot come off mute and ask it yourself, feel free to put it in the chat and I'll ask it for you. I don't see any questions in the chat, so um, I'll give you all a minute. Keena says greetings to a fellow former regent.
Ah, thank you. Yeah, I was just pulling it up right now.
John O'Keefe says you still ride. I don't know what that means. That must be an inside joke.
I believe he's talking about Harley Davidsons.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And
yeah. Hey,
yes,
Tom.
hey, how
Yeah, I'm
are you?
still here at Select Specialty Hospital in Gulfport, and we met briefly when you were down running the Biloxi Hospital. And anyway, I sent Sean a text message early on in your presentation. This is really good stuff. I've really enjoyed your presentation. You just never really know kind of where somebody's coming from and the concepts they're going to bring forward from their past experiences and beliefs and so forth. But I really enjoyed this, Tom. It's good to reconnect with you here today.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. That was very kind of you. And yes, I still ride. I have 2020 Fat Boy now, so 30th anniversary. And my son's going to be up from Florida this Sunday, so we're going to go ride for a few hours.
Awesome.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions in the chat, but we do want to thank you so much for your time today. And anyone that wants to help us or that wants to attend his afternoon session, I did put the link in the chat. It's going to be hard for me to get you in this quickly, but you know, we've worked miracles before. So hopefully the ACHE registration will work. But for those of you that did register for the panel, you'll see Tom again at 1. And we appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll put my contact information in the chat. So if anybody has any follow-up questions or conversations or anything they want to share, they got a great story. I love stories. So
Yeah,
feel
we
free
did
to
record it.
reach out to me.
We'll send the recording to all and to you so you can share it. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Bye.